Hey guys, it's Robert, and in this video we are going to take a look at the equals method that is part of the object class. So every class that we create automatically has an equals method with the default implementation. So down here I've got this class X with just a couple of fields, I for int, D for double. Got a constructor here that simply takes two parameter values, I and D, assigns them to the appropriate this I and this D, and the this reference here simply indicates that this I refers to the field and I here refers to the parameter. That just makes sure that these things don't get confused and we get the proper initialization. And down here in the main method, we're creating two objects, x1, which is a new x object, initialized with 4 for I and 4.5 for D. Then down here, x2 is also an x object, initialized with the exact same values, 4 and 4.5. So let's run the program and see what happens when we output x1 equals x2 using the equality operator and x1 equals x2 using the equals method. So here we go. Over here we can see that the output for both of these statements was false. And that's not at all what we want to take a look at, because obviously the objects are the same, and so we want the equals method to return true. Now what does this actually mean? Where we're using the equality operator, in this case we're saying, does the value stored in x1, is that value exactly equal to the value stored in x2? Well, we know that the values stored in x1 and x2 are actually references, or the locations in memory where these two objects exist. And since these two objects are different, we know that the value of x1 will be different from the value of x2, and so we get false printed up here, which is exactly what we would expect. Well, it just so happens that the default implementation in the object class of the equals method does exactly what this statement does here. It compares the references of the two objects, which is not what we want. We don't want the references to be compared. We want the actual values stored in the variables. And so we've got to override the equals method. Now there's a very easy way to do that. In fact, Eclipse will do that for us. So we're going to come right up here, make sure our cursor is positioned after the constructor. We're going to go up here to source, and down here we're going to say generate hash code and equals methods. And we're going to make sure that the D and the I are checked. Generate the method comments, that's good. And down here we're just going to click OK. And in this particular case, the hash code method gets created for us. We'll talk about that in a different video. But let's take a look at the equals method and exactly what that represents. Okay, we can see here that the equals method that was created by Eclipse has a bunch of stuff here. All of it is very important in terms of determining whether two objects are the same. So the first thing we do is to check to see if the this reference in the object that calls the equal method is the same as the reference that's passed as an argument. Notice that the reference here, the parameter, is of type object, which means we can really pass any kind of an object, a reference to any kind of an object, to this equals method, and that will satisfy the parameter. So we've got to make sure that we do some checking on this object reference to make sure that it's the right in the right format. So this first statement simply checks to see if the object that calls the equals method is the same as the object that's passed in. In other words, is just comparing one object to itself. Next thing we do is to check to see if this object reference is null. If it is, then we want to return false, obviously. The next thing we want to do is check to see if the class of the object that calls the equals method is the same as the class of the object reference that's passed. If they're not the same, then we return false. Then the next statement is very important. What we want to do is to take this reference to some object and cast that as a reference to X. And so we create other as a reference of type X, and then we cast the object reference to of type X and store that in other. Then we do this kind of funny looking thing here. We call the double to long bits and pass D, which is the D value of the object that calls the equals method, and compare that to the D value of the object that is passed as a parameter. And would just recommend that you take a look at the double to long bits in the double class in the Java API to see how this works and why this is important. Then the final thing that we do is check to see if the I value in the object that calls the equals method is the same as the I value in the object that is passed as an argument. If they're not the same, then we return false. If all of these things get through, then the final thing that we'll return is true, and we're sure then that the object is the two objects are the same.